Welcome back to The Outright Effect, a podcast in which unique perspectives challenge us to be better versions of ourselves. We're two ambitious women who talk about how we like to stretch our creativity and work on self-growth to become better people. I'm Tempsy.
And I'm Shelly, and today we have brought back a special guest. Carol Surban has been on our podcast a couple of episodes so far. I think this is the third time that we're having you on here. Last time we talked about moving to a new country and Carol's experience with that, and we kind of, got into some of those details. But today we want to talk more about transitioning from one job to another, changing career, why folks out there might be going through this kind of transition in their lives. And Dempsey and I had a really good chat with Carol about these types of topics, and we thought we would bring her on and we could all discuss this a little bit more.
Yeah, welcome back, Carol.
Thank you. It's so good to be here with you ladies.
We love having you on, obviously. So, we've all gone through career changes, moved, even if it's not a career change, moved to different companies. And I think depending on where you are in the stages of life, you either make the decision on a whim or you have put a lot of thought into it. And I think we're all at the point where if we were to make a career change or move companies, I think there's definitely a lot more thought that goes into that. And one of the biggest things that comes up for me is you got to get super clear on your why, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because we're talking about making a change in kind of the lane of your life, the career lane, right? But just recognizing that change is going to have impacts in all sorts of areas of your life. So really understanding your why is going to help you be realistic and honest about what's going to actually be the impact of making that change and why. Because if you're making it in isolation around, let's say, just money, like I need more money, or I'm not making enough money, and you're not looking at other factors, like maybe, the current company you're with, you really love the team and you love the work you're doing, and really kind of layering in, like, what's your motivation? What's your why for doing this? And then you can start to see if where you're thinking about moving or what you're thinking about doing really aligns with that why, as opposed to just making it out of, the grass is greener over there, or I'm in so much pain in my current position, or, I don't like this so much. You're just trying to get out of something. And so pausing and really thinking about why you're doing it and what matters to you, what your goals are, what your values are, what is it that you like or you don't like about where you're at, and where are you hoping to get with where you're going. Really being conscious and considerate about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one point that you mentioned earlier was not just focusing on salary.
Yeah. And
I think that's changed over time. I do think there are still people who focus on a bump in salary, like the next step that's going to get them to that next level in their salary. But I think times are changing, or have been changing, and people see that there is more to your life or your work life than just what you get paid. There's so many different variables that can impact your overall happiness because you're at your job a third of your life, right?
Yeah. And I think you bring up a really good point around, like, with the pandemic, there was a real collapsing in, many people have felt for many years that, like, work was intruding more and more in life, right? Like, you've got a phone, you're getting emails, you're getting texts, you're getting Slacks. But when the pandemic hit, like, that collapse happened in a very real way, right? Like you were no longer going to an office for a lot of people in the professional world. You were staying at home, and you got to kind of see and reevaluate what it was that you liked or didn't like. Like, I think a lot of people got some clarity around the fact that I don't like an hour-long commute. That is not something I'm happy to do, having now spent a year to a year and a half not having to do that and getting that time back. So I do think, like, that's one thing to consider, that if you're looking at this decision through an incredibly narrow focus, like you've got one lens on, like pay, you need to figure out how to put some different, to kind of broaden your perspective and put some different lenses in. And figuring out how to do that. Like, does it mean having a conversation with somebody, like a trusted mentor or an ally, that you can kind of open up and say, here's what I'm thinking, and this is why I'm thinking it. What else should I be considering? What am I not seeing in this equation that I need to be thinking about when doing this kind of a move?
Yeah. And I feel like it's been so ingrained in people for so long that a monetary bump in pay is you getting to that next level as though it's a milestone. Right. And I think that we are so socialized to think that that is that, or like a promotion, or like getting more work or something like that, is the thing that we want, that, I think we forget, like, what do we actually want though? And taking a step back and like thinking about that. And oftentimes, depending on who you are and what your situation is, it very well could be money for some people, and it very well could be something else for whoever else. And I think it's okay, right? Just depending on what's going on for that person. But I think, it's an interesting thing that as both of you are saying, I have noticed a shift, maybe not amongst like personally, like people who I know, but I've definitely been reading a lot more about it and kind of like seeing that for myself, right? Like, no, yeah, no, I agree with these concepts. And so I think it's interesting, and it's something that people are talking a lot more about now.
Yeah. It's no longer like the one metric, right, that says this is good or bad, like making more. There's people, I think, have really expanded their view of what the landscape of work really is. Like, what goes into that? There's the commute, there's the people you work with, there's the actual work you're doing, there's the ability to do it on your timeline. So I think those are all important aspects of work to consider, as well as the pay, when thinking about that move. But also really thinking about, like what you said, Shelley, what do you really want? Like, what do you want from this? What are you hoping to get from this change? And having that clarity, that inventory of what you're wanting, is going to make it much easier to evaluate opportunities as they come up, right? To see, does this really match with who I am and what I want to do and what I want for myself and my life?
For sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in preparation for this conversation, you had mentioned a compass exercise for recalibration. Can you expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's called Compass. It's this free resource. They put a new one out around December of every year. So it's designed to be an annual thing, but it really does walk you through your previous year and then has you look forward to the next year. And I'm just thinking about it, like, it's not time bound. Like, it doesn't, like, you could do it, the previous 12 months and the next 12 months, it doesn't have to be January. Like, I think this past year, I didn't do mine until March because I just wasn't ready to consider the year, I think. But it really gives you an opportunity to, in a structured way, kind of inventory your life. Like, okay, what is it that was great in the area of finances for me? What was great in the past year in the area of my career and my family, my relationships, my hobbies, my learning and growth and development? And it gives you this kind of structured way to really look at and inventory your life as it is right now, and how it's been in the past year. And then taking all of that and kind of holding that in your head, and those reflections that you had from going through that exercise, looking at what you want for the next 12 months and what you're hoping to get. And I think it's a great way, like, if you're looking at making a change, especially if you're making a change that's not just, okay, I'm going to be doing the same work in this, in the same industry, but it's going to be just with a different company. But like, let's say you're thinking about making a change in terms of the type of work you're doing, whether it's moving into being an entrepreneur or moving into a different type of work altogether. Like, maybe you're in sales and you want to go into, data analysis or something. I don't know. But it's a great way to help you kind of put your finger on what it is you want in the various areas of your life. And then you can start to see, like I said, how do the opportunities in front of you align with that and support it, or how do they complicate it, right? If it's something you really want, if you really want to move into data analytics from sales, maybe your finances are going to take a hit, but that's okay because you really want this change in career. And so it gives you an opportunity, I think, to to reflect on the past and really open your eyes to what's coming and what you need to be thinking about if you make that change.
I think that's a great exercise. I would love to do it, but I think I would end up like delaying on it because it's a lot of thought that goes into thinking through the previous year, and I have a horrible memory as it is. And then looking forward to the new year and you know, what changes or differences can I see? So that would be tough for me, but I think it's definitely important, especially when you're trying to plan for your future.
Yeah. Well, and I think, so I'll give you the thing that I do, Tempsy, is I don't rely on my memory. And I think they even have this in the workbook. They're like, take out your calendar and take out your phone where you took pictures and go through. And so that's what I do. I sit down, and it's a fun exercise, like to sit and do, you know, I make myself coffee and put some music on, and I look back at my calendar and be like, oh, that's right. That was, you know, that was the month that I started this thing, and I did this, and oh, those pictures. And it just kind of reminds you. So there's some ways you can kind of support your memory in that reflection process. And I do that.
That's a good idea.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I also hear of people who, like, let's say, for example, like keep a physical planner or something like that, right? When they're coming up to the end of the month, they're like using a page or a section of a page just to kind of like jot things down as they have remembered or reflecting on the month. But that doesn't mean that one has to wait until the month is over. You know, someone could just be jotting things down as it's like coming to their mind in the middle of the week somewhere, you know, in their like designated notebook or whatever. I think that's so funny. And it's so funny that you mentioned pulling up your calendar and pulling up pictures, because like for me, once something is done, it's kind of done. You know, the things that I keep in my mind are things I still need to do. And so I do go back and like look at like, oh yeah, I ate that. Like I went to that place and I ate that thing, or like that's what I was doing like in January. Like, yeah, I mean, I think for people who are taking like pictures often of like whatever, you know, wherever they're going and of whatever they're doing, like I think that is a great way. Like, and pictures just help jog the memory easier than even like notes sometimes, like written notes. Personally, I feel like pictures are easier for me. You're unintentionally keeping a log.
Yeah. And I think the other thing about it too is we are kind of victims to whatever emotional state we're currently in. And I mean that in the best possible way. Like if you're happy and you're content about things, we often think forwards and backwards in a way that like, okay, the past was good and the future will be good. And if we're in a miserable state, we can oftentimes color the past and the future with that miserable paintbrush, right? And I think looking at things like your calendar and your pictures, it takes you out of the current space you're in. So if you're thinking about changing a job because you hate where you're working right now and you don't like what you're doing, or you don't like your boss or whatever, you can paint with a very broad brush in ways that can get you to some not so great decisions, right? So in some ways, that exercise of looking back and using those tools of your calendar and pictures can bring some more objectivity to like the reality of what you were experiencing at that time.
Very interesting.
It's not all bad. It's not all good. It's life. It's mixed up. You know, it's got a lot of this and a lot of that. And then what do you actually then want for the future, if that's the case?
Right. So what are some other considerations should be made for making a move? We talked about reaching out to coaches and mentors and things of that nature to get support, which is really important. But what are some other things that you feel like are really important to consider?
Yeah, I do think talking to people is important, but I would put a caveat on it. I've known people, and I'm sure I've been guilty of it myself, where it's like you've turned into a poll taker, right? You go around and are taking a poll, like, do you think I should do this? You know, and instead of doing the work you maybe need to do, which is to kind of get quiet and reflect and do some of that inventorying, right? And so you kind of go on this tour of like asking people for input, and that can make you feel good, but it doesn't necessarily get you to the place you need to be in terms of knowing yourself and what you really need and want to do. So I would say definitely talk to people, but be selective, you know, and talk to people that you trust and that you know, either your interests in mind or like you're can be objective and help you see things that maybe you're not seeing. Because I know sometimes when you're getting ready to make a move, there can be a lot of wishful thinking. There can be a lot of magical thinking about like, oh, it's going to be so much better. It's going to be this. I'm going to be so much better. I'm going to be so different in this new space, in this new job. And, just having a trusted thought partner on some of this can be really valuable. So I think that's good. And then in terms of, other things to consider, I do think like once you do get to a place of knowing, okay, I do want to make this move, really looking for what's going to help you with that, right? Like what's going to help you make that transition in the best possible way. So I always think about like, how do you set yourself up for success, not only when you get there, but when you leave and when you're going, like all of those things. So really thinking about, if you're leaving an organization, how do you do that well? How do you build bridges and continue to have relationships with people into your new role? And, what do you need in the interim between one role and the other to set yourself up for success for starting the new one? So for some people, that looks like taking a week off, taking a couple weeks off. I mean, I've talked to some people that have they use it as this opportunity to take an extended period of time off that they would normally never have to be able to do. And, really thinking about what you need and what could set you up. And also balancing, obviously, the new organization you're going into, like what do they need, right? Because you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot, but being mindful of that. And some people will come in to that final negotiation around, salary and starting time and stuff like that with an understanding, they shared with the organization that they have a trip planned, and that trip planned is really just for them to have a break between one role and the other to prepare and get ready for that next role. So that's, I think, one thing.
I like that idea.
Yeah. Just giving yourself breathing room, because we go from one thing to the other, and big changes, they have an impact on you. And oftentimes, if you don't give a space for that impact to land and you managing it, it can land in other ways. It can land in, you get burnt out or exhausted, or you're just not pacing yourself, right, for this new role.
Shelly and I think we had talked a while ago about the fact that we had never thought to do that until later in our careers, in later career transitions of like taking time off. And even then, like when I did it, I think my very last transition, I was like, a week, what am I going to do? And then I just filled all kinds of stuff I needed to do at home in there and did not rest at all. Which is the whole point.
That's a really good point. Like getting the time off, it doesn't necessarily, depending on your personality, mean you will actually use it in a way that is intended. So being intentional about maybe how you're going to use some of that time too, to like, right. Whether it's disconnect, rest, in some cases, like spending that time taking care of home stuff may be what needs to happen to really make you feel relaxed about going into your new role. So it kind of just depends on the person. Yeah.
That's true too. And it's so funny because I will honestly say I've never really taken a break to do nothing between jobs. Like honestly, I wasn't, but at the same time too, I wasn't trying to, I feel like the reasons why the breaks were there was because of an organization's process with onboarding. And so the day I was leaving and the day I was starting the next one, there were gaps between because of those processes in place. And so I was almost like forced to, and it wasn't very long, like a few days or something like that, take those days off. But I used them purposefully for something else. I thought to myself, like, these are the days I'm going to be working on things for my YouTube channel, because when else do I get a chance to be off on a Monday or something like that, And so that's what I did with that. And I'm also not against doing that either. I was like, yes, I got it done. And I felt good about it. So I think, it is that time to do whatever, help somebody feel like they got out of a break what they wanted to. But it's one thing that I kind of want to go back to that you're talking about, Carol, is sort of like the thought about talking to people and how that's important when you're making a transition. But the thing that I felt like I had done at some point is being the poll taker, and how taking the poll then made me think things about the job that I was going to, right? Like, I feel like other people's opinions played into me thinking it was like, for example, a good idea, or, whatever the case was. And, sometimes I feel like, that definitely happened to me. I feel like when I was younger, when I was like earlier on and finding a new job, making transitions and things like that. But I think it's funny because as time passed and I would like, be the poll taker, like, want to talk to people about it. Like, what do you think about this? And then, some people are like, oh, well, this, well, that. And I was the one also kind of being like, well, hold up. That's not what I want to do. Like, you think that's what's going to happen to me there? And you think it's a good idea? I'm thinking it's not a good idea. And so I think it's like interesting, the conversations that may or may not like, come out of doing something like that, like going through the process or the exercise of like talking to other people about potential opportunities that are coming up when someone is trying to make up their mind about making the move forward or holding off. Yeah.
Yeah, the two words that popped into my head when you were talking about that, Shelley, that I think can, no matter how you decide to kind of go out and talk to people to get your own level of clarity, the two words are curiosity and agenda. And I think like as a person trying to make a decision, the more curiosity you can bring into the process, the better, right? And the second word, agenda, is being able to kind of recognize if the person that you're talking to has an agenda. Do they have an agenda for you? Like they think you shouldn't be changing jobs, because they don't like changing jobs, right? So being able to kind of suss out when you're talking with people, do they have an agenda for me that's really their agenda, right? That's not what I want. And I think we go back to what, that opening question you had, Shelley, around the why. Like if you have clarity on your why, when you are trying to maybe further clarify your thinking on things, that clarity is going to butt up against people's agenda, and you're going to immediately have a reaction and know whether or not that's what you want or not. I almost always like have a sense of a strong reaction, right? Like, oh, that's not really what I'm thinking. That's not what really works for me. I love this trick of, have you guys ever done that coin toss trick where like if you're trying to decide one way or the other and you assign, heads is I stay in my job, tails, I go to the new one. And you flip the coin and you tell yourself, okay, I'm gonna flip the coin and whatever it is, that's what I'm going to do. No matter what comes up, if you're, if you react disappointed or excited, that tells you something. It's like a calibration method. It's like, okay, I'm excited to be moving. You recognize right away that that's the decision you need to make. Or, oh, I'm disappointed that I'm moving. Then you recognize right away that that's a decision you probably shouldn't make. So some of it is being able to calibrate internally. And you can do that by your reactions to people and how you're reacting to what they're saying you should do or what they think is the right thing.
It's funny because when you said the coin toss thing, I hadn't heard of it, but as soon as you started explaining it, I was like,
I know
exactly what she's
saying.
Yeah, right. When you said coin toss, I was like, ooh, it's like no, why did I get heads? No.
Like there's a way to tap into that gut part of you that knows what you really want.
Right.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've used to really help with that is the concept of resentment. When I left my last job, that was something I had kind of like what I would call a long goodbye. They wanted me to meet with a bunch of people to make sure I really wanted to leave the organization. And so I had all these kind of chats with executives and different things. And it was actually really clarifying because it helped me kind of do what I wasn't taking a poll, but they wanted me to take the poll, right? Like they wanted me to go around and talk to people. And it was really clarifying because I use this idea of resentment. And every time somebody would say to me, oh, Carol, stay in the organization and you can come onto my team and do this with, and I know this is work you're going to enjoy. And I would say to myself, like, okay, I would get excited, right? Oh, that does sound good. I like that. That sounds like a great idea, a great opportunity. And then I would say, okay, am I going to feel resentful about this decision in 3 weeks? And I would make myself kind of mentally think about living with the decision for a certain amount of time. And I always would come to like, yeah, I'm going to feel resentful because there's, the organization I left, there's still going to be this, and this that I'm going to have to deal with. And I don't want to deal with that anymore. I don't want to have that in my life anymore. And so that was a really powerful directional question I asked myself. Am I going to be, because I don't want to be a person that's living with resentment every day, resentment about the work I'm doing or the time I'm spending or the things I have to do, and that was a really powerful question for me, is around resentment.
That's a great idea. Now, in terms of getting ready for, the big change, I think one of the things that I tried to do in leaving one of my roles was, well, every role that I've ever been with that I leave is I make sure that I finish strong.
Mm-hmm.
But that mostly goes into the work, like making sure nothing of mine could ever come up down the road as, oh my gosh, Tempsey did or did not do this in a negative light. Are there other things that should be considered? Because I feel like I may have focused a little too much on the work.
Yeah, that totally resonates with me, Tempsey, because the last job that I left, like I had been there almost 11 years and, I was part of the leadership team. So I felt like there was a lot of things I needed to kind of prepare. Like in my mind, I thought like, I want everything wrapped up with a bow on top, right? When I leave, like, I just want it all done. And I was hyper focused on that. I was hyper focused on, what SOPs do I need to write so people know how to do this? Who do I need to meet with and do knowledge share sessions with so they understand when this process comes up during the year, how to handle it. Really focused on that part of it. And then I had a lunch with a previous boss, and he gave me the advice of, he's like, I know you're going to want to focus on getting everything done and leaving everybody and everything in good hands. And he said, and you will. Don't even worry about that. That's going to be fine. What I would really encourage you to do is focus on the people. Focus on the relationships. You've been there for a decade. What are the relationships that matter to you? And make sure that you schedule coffees and lunches and take the time to connect with people. Not only because it's a great thing to do, like you're wrapping up your career here at this company, and it feels good to connect with people, but also because part of what you need to do as a professional and your responsibility is to build a bridge from one part of your life as a professional to another part, and that those relationships are the bridge, right? Like my work is like I have my experience and my the things I've worked on, and I'm going to take that with me. Like I'll always have that experience and always have that knowledge to take with me. But those relationships, they don't come with me unless I build a bridge to take them with me. And so that was a really big piece of advice. And I'll be honest, you guys, like I'm so thankful for it, because I made the shift out of that career, but then I also moved away from where I was living for 25 years to a new country. And that time that I spent in the last month of my working life at that company, having those coffees, making sure those relationships were warm and intact, meant that I could continue to have those relationships when I was living thousands of miles away. And it was hugely important for me. Not only from just a personal perspective of staying connected, but professionally with my network and keeping that alive and warm and growing, even though I wasn't living there anymore. So yeah, I think that's a really important one. The other thing is really kind of looking at what's good about what you're doing right now and your work situation, and how can you consciously make sure that some of those things that you really enjoy show up in your new role. So, if you have certain ways about doing your schedule, or there's certain things that are just really working, because oftentimes we ask ourselves the question, we don't even have to ask ourselves a question. We focus on what's not working and we try and fix it. And we oftentimes ignore what is working. And so I think thinking about what's really working in your current role and making sure you consciously are thinking about bringing that into your new role, and how are you going to do that? So like, for example, if in your current role, you have an arrangement with your manager that you work from home 2 days a week, like, and this is, pre-pandemic and stuff, but like, is that something that you need to make sure you start to have a conversation about? Or maybe you've already had that conversation, in the interview process, and you want to make sure that the structure is going to be there to support that when you start working. So just thinking about the ways that you like what you're doing and how you're doing it, and how do you bring that into your new role. I think that's important too.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think on the flip side, sometimes the things that bring us to the decision to leave an organization or make a big career move are considerations to think about in terms of, like, for instance, if the reason was burnout, regardless of what led to that burnout, what was my role in getting into the burnout phase, and how can I take that into my new role? And I think part of that is like self-support, or like mental preparation, right? Like, here are the things that I did in the past that probably were contributing factors, and here's the experiment, right, that I'm going to do with myself to ensure that, or try my best to not let it happen again.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important. And I also want to say it's not always easy to do, right? Because it's like being able to kind of float outside of yourself and see your life, right? And see, okay, where was I in this? This equation didn't exist without me. So what was my role? And being willing to look at that. One of my favorite sayings is, wherever you go, there you are. Like, it doesn't matter if you move to a different country, or move to a different job, or move to a different neighborhood. You're still you, and you still have to contend with all of the unique, wonderful, frustrating ways that you work, right? That your brain works, that you react to things. And so I think I'm going to use that word again, inventory, like kind of looking and inventorying, like what's my role here? Like, if I left because of burnout, what got me there? And like, for me, I mean, that was something that I looked at too, because I was in a place of being burnt out when I left my last job. And, one of the things was, I realized I have this huge people pleasing part that I have a really hard time putting up boundaries around my work and around my time. And that's something I've got to work on, and I've got it. And it's led me, in my education as a coach, and getting certified as a coach. It's, that's been a focus of a lot of my work in that space, is like, how do you set healthy boundaries so that you don't burn out? How do you assert your needs to yourself and in an organization, in a family, so that you're heard and you're able to get what you need in order to not get to that burnout place. So yeah, I think that's hugely important, and it's, we talked about burnout and like people pleasing, but there's also things like, some people go the other direction and they get angry, right? There's a lot of anger and a lot of frustration, intense frustration with situations. And that's another place to look, like, where's my part in this? Is it because I'm not speaking up at times? So is that something I need to work on in this new role? Like, I need to work on being vocal sooner about things that are bothering me. I need to be more intentional about not making myself available 24/7 in this new role. Set my boundaries. You teach people how to treat you. But in order to do that, you need to know how you want to be treated and what behaviors help teach people. I think that's hugely important. Yeah.
Yeah. I think I was visualizing something really funny when you just said, Carol, you teach people how to treat you. And perhaps you can now relate because you have a pet now.
Yeah.
My dog certainly trains us how to treat him, because he likes peace and quiet, and he'll get us to leave the room by barking at us. And so, I think basically what I'm saying is, like, I think it's true. And like, clearly my dog's not doing maybe he might be doing some self-reflection. I don't know what's going on in his mind. But, I think it just kind of is like showing at a very basic level, right? Like, at some point we learned to people please or be okay with it or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we're kind of down to like the core, building those boundaries and recognizing that our habits are showing people certain things, and then that leads to like expectations and everything, right? Like if we're sending emails at 11 o'clock p.m., people are like, oh, Shelly's going to reply whenever. She's going to get it done even when she's sleeping, at like 2 in the morning. And so doing those, like being mindful of like those kinds of interactions and what we're putting out there, I think is really important to reflect on, especially when we're noticing those feelings of being like annoyed or, whatever the case might be, burnt out, etc. And how can we help ourselves manage that? Because I feel like I'm hearing more and more these days about like advocating for yourself, like in lots of different ways, right? And I think, that is also a method of like kind of advocating for yourself, is to have those boundaries, because at the end of the day, we all are the ones who can stand up the most for ourselves, who can, speak to our needs the best. And, that's all we can do, right? Everyone else is their own person.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on something. So I did my research paper on boundaries with my coaching program. And I learned a lot through doing that. One thing is when you're thinking about those boundaries, is thinking about kind of the ways in which maybe you set good boundaries or don't set good boundaries. Like, what are the circumstances? Like, do you have issues with time? Like you don't have good boundaries around your time. You don't have good boundaries maybe around your ability to like manage relationships. So thinking in terms of like, where are boundaries an issue? And my theory is like, the more areas of your life that you have boundary issues, the more likely you are to get to a place of frustration and burnout in any given situation, because you've got too many fronts in your life where you're not setting healthy boundaries. And so you're getting encroached upon all the time. So that's one thing, is to look at like where, if you're doing this inventory about maybe how you need to do things differently in this new role, what areas in your life do you have healthy boundaries and what areas don't you? And even kind of what types of situations, like maybe you're able to set really healthy boundaries with your family, but you can't do it at work. And so getting curious about that, like, what is it about work? Is it the power dynamic? Is it fear? Like, what's underneath that's not making it possible? And then the other thing, and I think you touched on this, is like, yourself the best. And I think the thing that I got to in my research was, in order to set boundaries with others, you have to actually set them with yourself and like respect yourself enough to think that the boundaries matter. And so like, if you are not good at setting boundaries around your time, let's say, I would get curious about whether or not you think your time is valuable enough to set some boundaries around. And that to me goes back to compassion, self-compassion, and being compassionate to yourself around your needs and what is important to you, and having that be a priority for yourself, right? Because I think that's what ends up happening, is our priorities when we don't have good boundaries, it's sort of like we are allowing other people's needs, wants, and priorities to always supersede ours. And that's, I think, where we get in trouble. Like, there's always negotiation at work where, there's going to have to be trade-offs sometimes. But when it's consistently that the job wins, that my boss gets what they need and I don't get what I need, that's when it can get into that place of resentment and burnout and anger and frustration, I think.
Yeah.
So let's say we're now ready to go. We're heading into our new role, or we're there, right? We've made the decision, we're there. What are the things that, maybe not considerations, but things that might come up, things that will be different, that will affect us?
Yeah.
Like, is there like a professional culture shock?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of saying it, Tempsy. Because I think, the last time we chatted about this, we talked about when you move like to another country, like there's culture shock. And I think there is professional culture shock, because you have to remember, like, you're moving from one organization to another, that those organizations have, it's like their own society, their own set of values and their norms. And even just thinking like nuts and bolts, like the physical space, you're going from a place where you know where everything is and you know all the people and you have this familiarity to a place where you don't, like you don't even know where the bathroom is on day one usually, And so being just having some awareness around the fact that, okay, this is going to be new and I need to cut myself, some slack because it's probably going to be a little bit more energy draining, right? Like when you're in a new space and meeting new people and trying to take all this stuff in, you're actively, like your brain is active the whole time. You're not on autopilot anymore. Like you're constantly learning and taking new information in. So being compassionate with yourself that like you might have more exhaustion in the first, couple weeks to a month of this new place, just kind of getting used to it. But I think also going back to that place of curiosity, this is also an opportunity to not try and get into autopilot, but to be really curious about what you're seeing and what's happening, and using that place of this is new to actually get curious, ask questions, get to know everything in a way that is going to help you succeed in that space. Going back to what you were talking about, Shelley, with the dog, because we have a new puppy, and like you see them, like when they go into a new space, they don't just sit there and go like, okay, this is a room like any other room. They like smell everything. Like I mean, he found like dust bunnies I didn't even know existed because he'd like shove his nose into the crevice of something, and it's like that, being that kind of new, you're in a new environment and there's a lot you can take in and there's a lot you can learn and understand if you're being curious and alert to that new space.
Yeah, that's so funny. I had this, like, those reusable grocery shopping bags. I had like chips in there because like I had bought like one of those big Costco boxes of chips, and now it was lower in the box. I'm like, I don't need this box anymore. Let me get rid of it. I'll put it in this shopping bag. My dog went in there and I was like, you need to get out. That's not for you. Yeah. We do not give chips to dogs here.
But I'm reminded of this. I don't know if it's a saying or not, but like interested people are interesting. Like when you're in a new space, if you're showing interest in something, and you part of what you're considering in this new role and this new organization you're in is building relationships, right? Like you just left a place where you had relationships and you need to build relationships, and that capacity to be curious and interested is like, it's like reaching your hand across to somebody and then they take your hand, right? Like if you don't show that interest, it's like you're not really ever putting your hand out and extending to create that relationship. So showing that interest and being curious about people, about what they're doing. Like everybody's going to want to know about you, but it's also like it's reciprocal, and you can really get a lot out of asking people some really, just great questions that you're showing how curious you are about who they are and what they're doing in those beginning spaces, because you're making that first impression with everybody, right? And it's like, oh, Shelley's she's really interested in things, and she's curious about me and my work, and I like that feeling. And people then start to have this warm feeling about working with you because you're showing interest in what they're doing, not just in who you are.
Yeah, and I would definitely say that I have, as you were mentioning, like company culture shock, we were talking about that for a little bit. That has definitely happened to me, and I feel like I am that person to like look at my surroundings and ask those questions. Like let's say, there are companies that I've worked for that have like little areas for employees to like either hang out in or whatever, and like me being like, does anyone actually hang out there? Is like my question, right? Like, yeah. Especially during a time where in the past couple of years, for example, like not a lot of people are in the office. So if somebody were to see nobody there, they'd be like, is this usual, or is it because there's a pandemic? Versus somewhere that's like bustling, has everyone around all the time, you can like see it a little bit better. And I think, sometimes companies do have those places where it's like, we thought this was a great idea, we set it up, and then nobody used it. So I think, whenever I am in a new company or a new environment, I do ask those questions, because I'm kind of like, what if I want to use it, but I see nobody using it? I'm that weirdo that goes and like tries things out. I want to know if it's like normal. I don't want to be like throwing anybody off. Like, is she okay? So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like it is kind of being curious too, to just kind of know, to orient yourself to what the expectations are. Not to say that you have to follow those expectations, but to know like what's the norm. So like if you want to complicate them or do something different, at least you're doing it knowing what it is you're doing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've noticed in starting in new roles is that the way that I had previously worked or organized myself are no longer working in a new space. So I've had to, and I think, that can probably be assumed, but not in all cases, right? Like if you're moving to a new company but you're doing the same kind of work, then you might think that the pace is the same and the way that they do things are the same, but it's not always the case. And so sometimes you can just be trying the same exact organizational system and structure that you had your whole life, but it's not working. Something's not clicking, right? And so I've noticed that I've been much more intentional about adjusting my organizational process, whether that be note taking or making sure tasks get done on time or whatever the case might be. And so what maybe had applied previously may be much different in a new role or a new business or in a whole new career.
Yeah, that's a really valuable thing to think about, because we've talked about the fact that like if you're going into a new place, there's going to be new constraints potentially, right? New freedoms, new constraints. There's a new culture you're going into. And maybe some of the ways you worked just because of that cultural change don't work anymore. Just because of the work change, the new expectations, maybe there's more constraints on your time or more meetings or things like that. And I mean, I found myself in a place where I have a system of kind of personal structure or productivity that works for me for a period. And then I find myself really frustrated because it doesn't work anymore. And I keep trying to make it work, like it's like you keep going back to start and like, okay, let me just try it again. And that's can be really frustrating if the system itself needs to change, right? If like your approach to how you're doing your work and how you're organizing yourself and your rhythm needs to change. So I think having a way to do that, to recognize, okay, this is no longer serving me. So what do I need here? And then, trying, like we've used the word experiment, but like experiment, like try it out, see if that works. And if it doesn't, then keep trying something until you land on this is the way I can organize myself and set my day up and my rhythm. This is the structure that works for me here. But then also just recognizing that like things change, seasons change, even like kind of work cycles and things like that can come in, and just know that you need to adjust. One of the things I wanted to share with you guys, there's this program that I use around my health and food. They have this concept called resuming, and it's with a Z, REZOOM. It's like if you fall away from what you've been trying to do, you resume and you get back to it fast. And the lady that runs that program, she talks about kind of 4 factors: speed, self-talk, social support, and seeking a lesson. And I think I love it because it's not only applicable for like my health and the diet that I'm on and wanting to get back to those things, but it's true in so many other ways. Like if I set up a new system for myself and I fall away from it, like let's say I have a new system where I'm going to walk every morning and I'm going to do this and I do that, like the likelihood of me not doing that consistently is high, right? Like there's, we're not robots. It's not going to be perfect. But the more important thing is not being perfect, but getting back to it as quickly as we can when we realize we're off track. And I think that's true with our personal like productivity systems, is like, what's going on here? Like getting back to it as quickly as you can. How you talk to yourself and you kind of create the way you're feeling about it, I think is one thing. And if you need more support, maybe you need some support around it. Maybe it's something where you need to talk to somebody about, can we not do meetings on Monday morning first thing, because that's your time when you do your planning or something. But I think the biggest one that I always learn is like seeking the lesson. Like, what is it that I need to learn from this? And that's oftentimes can give you the clues of whether or not this system is really usable anymore in your life. And do you need to change it? Because we love our systems, right? We get kind of, or I guess I should say strategies. Like we love our strategies, and they can be, systems of what we're doing. And we can fall in love with one strategy and one system so much to the point that when it quits working, we don't want to give it up. It's like we spend a lot of time setting this up. And so just being willing to look at, is there something here that needs to change? And if you're moving from a new company and potentially to a new type of work, there's a lot that's probably going to need to change. So you're going to need to adjust and be flexible and evaluative in what you're doing to see if you want to and what you need to change.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I've definitely noticed that for myself. Being in a totally new place, having new types of work and like adjusting what I used to do, like how I used to take notes, how I used to like structure my day or whatever the case might be, like things that help me stay on track, and really trying other things because the work was so different.
Yeah. The other thing that just occurred to me, like, we're really talking a lot about people who do what they call, thought work, right? Where it's not like you're making a widget, or you're putting a bike together. It's this type of work that nobody really gives you the structure for how you need to do it. You have to create your own. And I think that's just owning that as a responsibility, as part of your responsibility as a professional in whatever work you're doing, to create your own structure and create your own way of doing it and evaluating it and adjusting as needed. So you don't get stuck in a rut. You don't get way off track. You don't get overwhelmed because suddenly the work has changed, but you haven't changed the way you're working. Like I'm guilty of that. Like because I love, Timothy and I have talked about this, where like love setting up, processes and systems, but they're only as good as how responsive they are to the reality of the world that they're there to support. Right. And so if your system is not responsive to the changes in your life, you're going to get to a place of frustration, or you're going to see your quality or your productivity go downhill because it's not working anymore.
Yes, absolutely. So flexibility is definitely key, and you always want to make sure you're catering to the new experiences and the new role and the new tasks that you're going to be doing. So I think that we've talked about a lot of great ways to kind of move away from a current role you might be in and going into a new role, and how to navigate all of that really successfully. So I really want to thank you, Carol, for coming on and talking with us about this. Your thoughts and your contributions are just so valuable, and we appreciate the time you take to meet with us and get information out there to those listeners of ours who could be definitely in this period of life where they're trying to figure this out, or on the fence of, should I leave this job? There's aspects that I like and aspects that I don't like. And I think this really gives a real holistic outline, or even some sort of like a playbook of what you can work through to make sure, or really try to make sure you're making the right decision. So thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us today.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Carol.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, I love how we kind of veer into some things and get to kind of what's underneath a lot of this stuff. I love that. It's great.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of The Outright Effect. You can find us at theoutrighteffect.com. Follow us on our social media accounts on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, all at The Outright Effect. You can also reach out to us by emailing us at theoutrighteffect@gmail.com. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you guys. Bye.